Hi there, I'm Nathan Agan. Welcome to the Working Actors Journey Rehearsal Room. We started this project already. It's been 4 years, over 4 years, June 2020. It came out of what we could do with all the time during the pandemic. We found that having the time to deeply explore just one scene over several weeks has really excited everybody involved. And this month we are embarking on a scene from Shakespeare's Richard II. It's the first time we are working on this play in the rehearsal room. Very excited. It's a really beautiful play. I think it has the most verse. It might be 100% verse. It's pretty close of all of Shakespeare's plays, so that's great. And I will say, for those familiar with John Barton's Playing Shakespeare series that they did in like the late 70s, maybe even early 80s, I see this as kind of a springboard off of that. This is an unscripted format. And in fact, theirs was heavily scripted. They had really figured out what they were going to say before they turned the cameras on. So this is really raw. You really get to see what's going on, the wonderful way that the creative process comes alive in real time. For those who are new here, what you're going to see is not, a final performance, or it hasn't been rehearsed before this. Maybe the actors and director and dramaturg have thought about it, read it, but it's all ready to be explored together. It's just a continued work in progress from week to week. It's an opportunity for artists of different generations and backgrounds to collaborate, learn from one another. And what I love is that it's never been a top-down structure. This, good ideas can come from anywhere. And I think theater at its best is like that. It's a true collaborative art form. I do believe that the rehearsal room, these kinds of spaces, continues the great theatrical history of apprenticeship. People such as yourselves watching can learn from professionals, people working, people who've been doing this 20, 30, 40 more years. How do they break down text? What are the questions to ask? How do you explore and communicate? How do you take direction? How do you give direction? All those great things can be part of this, and hopefully you can come away from this learning some tips and tricks and ideas and strategies for your own work. We can be more conscious about casting here when it comes to gender or age or race than theaters sometimes can be. We can explore things in different ways, which is a lot of fun. And we can bring artists together from all over the place. I know we have a number of people in Los Angeles tonight, but then we also have an actor out in Hawaii. So through the miracle of this technology, we can bring everybody together in the same room and they can all work on the material. So that's pretty much what we're doing here. If you want to support the project right now, as you probably can tell, if you're on YouTube or the podcast, all of our sessions that we're releasing are for free for you to just enjoy and learn from. So if you want to support, that's great. You can go do that through Patreon, but be sure to subscribe to YouTube and the podcast so you can get notifications of new stuff coming out. It starts just $5 per month, super affordable for the whole month, and you get a lot of sessions and good stuff. So I'll quickly say thank you to some of our patrons, Joan, Michele, Jim, Magdalen, Ivar, Claudia, Clif, and Jeff. Thank you so much for helping to keep the administrative lights on. That is my P.T. Barnum little spiel. I'm all done here. I'll turn it over to the artists so you guys can get into the material. If you have any questions and you're watching this on YouTube, post them below. We'll try to keep people aware of that and keep the conversation going offline. So that is it. I'll ask the group to do some quick introductions of themselves and just briefly where you are, your history maybe with this play if you have one, and what your involvement is for the next few weeks. And that's it. I'm going to head to the back of the theater. I will see you guys at the end, and have a great session.
Thanks, Nathan. So I guess, because Nick and Jamal, I've never met you before. I guess let's just start off with the introduction. So to sort of take that ball from Nathan, I think that sounds great. So I guess who are you? Who are you playing? And what's your previous involvement with the show? And I think because normally, obviously, if we were in person, we'd go around the circle. But since we are literally in a flat circle on this screen, I'd say let's go with a popcorn model. So once you're done, just toss it over to somebody. So I'll start us off. My name's Will Block. I'm an actor, producer, director, teacher, and I'm the artistic director of the Porters of Hell's Gate Theater Company in Los Angeles, California. I'm directing this, and I've played Richard II. I did it when I was 22, so I will not speak to the quality of the work that happened. And with that, I'll toss it over to Jamal.
Hey, hey, hey. It's really good to be here. My name's Jamal Douglas. I'm an actor, educator, artist, soulful being first. And I actually saw this production in London after I left the Old Globe back in 2015. And I was completely a different person back then. And so it's exciting to be walking back into this with new eyes wide open. And I feel like I'm starting from one as I like to do, with Shakespeare and histories and going to school for, you can get so up in your head and out of your body, or two in your body and not in your head. And so I'm completely open. I'm really curious as an actor to explore the nuance of relationship through the poetry that is being said. And so that's what's vibrating for me walking into this space this time around. And my first time working on the show ever and putting my mouth to these words. And when I was reading through it, I was hit with emotion in certain parts physically. And so I'm excited to see how that unfolds and how that sustains or shifts or change. And I'm going to throw it to Nick.
Thanks, Jamal. My name is Nick Cagle. I have seen and worked on this particular play before, and I think it's one of the most beautiful plays that I've ever read. I really, really enjoy the poetry. They did a production of it when I was in college in London. I went to Lambda, and another group did a production on it, and I was shocked and mesmerized by it. And then I was lucky enough to work on it in Christchurch, New Zealand in 2010. And that was quite some time ago. So it's been really great for the last couple of days to sort of try to wrap my head around it again. And it's a never-ending exploration of these plays, which is one of my favorite things about them, is you can read them and read them and read them and still never get to the bottom. So I'm really looking forward to this. I think that we're sort of switching back and forth on roles. I'm not exactly sure who will end up playing, which is exciting. And I'm grateful to be here with all of you. And thanks for having me.
And I'll toss it up. Miranda, why don't you close us out?
Yes, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Miranda Johnson-Haddad. I'm the resident dramaturg at A Noise Within Theater in Pasadena, and then I've been the guest dramaturg at for other shows. But my approach to dramaturgy is through the academy. My academic field is Shakespeare, and in particular Shakespeare in performance, because I am always aware, Will's heard me say this more times than he can count, but the plays were their text. It's valuable certainly to study them as text, but they were written as scripts, and I believe they don't really become complete until they are in performance. So I always feel a debt of gratitude to actors, whether it's on a Zoom screen or in the theater, who are helping bring that play to completion. This is my third time in the rehearsal room with Nathan. I'm thrilled to be working on this play. It's been one of my favorites always. When people ask me what's your favorite Shakespeare play, I cheat. The best I can say is my favorite play in any genre, and this is hands down my favorite history play. But the history plays are a lot more interesting than I think popular understanding believes them to be, and so I'm very excited to be bringing this one into at least partial completion. And just in case anyone was wondering, Miranda is my real name. As I like to say, did my parents have their wits about them or what? So really happy to be here with all you.
Admired Miranda. Well, thank you everyone for being here and for saying yes to this. So I'm going to talk at you for as little time as I can manage. Miranda has suffered through more than one rehearsal process with me, and so knows that I'm extremely long-winded. Nick and Jamal, you're about to discover that, and I'm so sorry.
And plenty of pop culture references, Friends, Tolkien, Harry Potter, whatever it may be. I laugh at all his jokes. I get them. I think they're funny.
Yes, I direct in Star Wars references.
Yeah.
But I'll yap at you for a little bit. I'll toss it over to Miranda, who would never say it herself, but is truly like an expert. Like is such a fantastic resource to have in the room. And then we're just gonna dive in, and we're just gonna start messing around with some text. So chose this scene. I just closed a repertory production of Henry IV Parts 1 and 2. My company is we're supposed to do all of them, and it was time to do the fours, and it was a massive undertaking and a very rewarding experience. And part of that, we did a staged reading of Richard II. I say staged. We did an unrehearsed reading of Richard II that went off very, very well because we got good actors, but I did absolutely nothing to make it good. Just to give our audiences context, because this is, as everyone in this room knows, this is the first play in an 8-play history cycle. And Henry IV, while being Miranda, I love Richard II. Henry IV might be my favorite 2 history plays, but Richard II is a very, very close second for me. And really, I mean, in my head, it's all one long play. But Henry IV, pretty much everything that happens in Henry IV has its genesis in this beautiful play. And as I said, I'd done the play when I was very, very young, and I'd had a great time. But I was reminded of just what a beautiful lyrical tragedy it is. Like, I feel like if this play is programmed, it is programmed in the context of, like, the Guthrie just did Richard II, Henry IV, and Henry V in a 3-show rep. And it's often programmed as the prequel. When the play stands on its own as a beautiful piece of writing, and is a really sort of, I would say, a profound meditation on multiple fronts. And that's Shakespeare in a nutshell, isn't it? I mean, he's always working on the macro, but he's always working on the micro, right? I think in terms of contemporary resonance, I think the history's taken as a whole, and I'll sort of wear my socialist badge proudly on my arm today, but the history's taken as a whole, I think, to me, resonate most acutely when they are examined as an investigation into the corrosive effect that power has on the human condition. That the real conflict in all of these plays is man versus crown, or woman versus crown, as casting may be. We had we played Henry IV as a woman, and she did a beautiful job. So I say man as sort of like a catch-all. Human versus crown, soul versus crown, right? Is it possible for a person to maintain their humanity while wearing that kind of absolute power? And the thing that strikes me looking at all of them, and I say the 8 play, I'm not including King John or Henry VIII in this, but if you look at the Henriad, right? Every king that we meet, we get to see them both as a king and as not a king, right? Not always in the same order, but we get to see them outside of that authority and inside of that authority. And every single one of them has a beautiful speech that are all variations on the theme of, well, this sucks. In this play, it's the hollow crown. Henry IV, uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. Henry V, upon the king. Henry VI might be my favorite, the homely swain. And then Richard III even has his own little version right before the Battle of Bosworth Field. So clearly we're dealing, like, Shakespeare's investigation is how do these people deal with this unnatural imposition upon their humanity? And Richard, in relation to that investigation, is a really interesting play because we see one man start as king and end as, well, dead, but end as not king. And then you have the other king, Henry IV, starts as not a commoner, but not king, and ends the play as the king. So you've got this seesaw effect, right? And this is the scene, right? This is the scene where power is handed from one to the other. Other things I'm sort of, I also wrapped up in that, is what is the nature of identity, right? And I think this is where the universal resonance and the sort of the micro starts to come in, right? The macro is how does this kind of pressure affect a person? How does this kind of power affect the person? Which some of us can relate to, some of us can't. But where we get into the universality of it is how does your position in society affect your sense of identity, right? It's the beautiful line in this scene: I know no I, for I must no thing be. That's not a line reading. We're gonna play around with that. But Richard gives up his assumed sense of self, and we are dealing with a man who has been king since he was 9 years old. And has been told every day since then that he was God's anointed. He's God's chosen. He can do no wrong. But we are also dealing with a uniquely perceptive mind, an insecure mind, an insecure heart, I think at the end of the day, a pretty terrified person from the word go. But we are also dealing with somebody who is possessed with the same level of perception and the same ability to comment on his surroundings with devastating accuracy that is famously noted in like Hamlet, right? The only difference is this man is born with a crown. And this is the scene where he gives it up, and he gives it. And the only other thing that I want to sort of make a note of, just because it leapt out at me listening to this reading, was that at no point is the crown demanded of him. And I think this speaks to his perception, right? That the very first person in this play to bring up the idea of an abdication is Richard when he is confronted by Bolingbroke. Now that could be read, and this is there's room for plenty of discussion, but that could be read as either him lying down and giving up, or that could be read as an extremely perceptive mind seeing which way the wind is blowing and know this is only ever going to go one way. And so what emerges is this really fascinating story of somebody who, when he was king, was not indecisive, but certainly irresponsible, certainly spent too much time listening to his yes men, insulated himself from hard truths, now faces the hardest truth of all, that his reign is coming to an end and there is nothing he can do about it, really. And through calling that situation out and through speaking honestly, is able to regain a certain amount of power. This is an abdication scene. Richard dominates it in terms of just lines on the page, and through it is able to deliver not just some of the most beautiful language in the play, but some of the cattiest language in the play. And some of the, he wipes the floor with the people around him. He absolutely walks out of this scene, possibly. But we'll leave it open to interpretation. But in terms of what's on the text, he walks out of the scene with a mic drop. So how do you get that person to that place? And what is it about this thing that they're wearing? Now, in terms of who's playing who, because I know that is a question mark, you are both playing both. So we've got 2 sessions ahead of us, and we can talk about how we're going to split up our time. But essentially, to call back to Nathan's earlier reference to the playing Shakespeare, this is our night of the dueling Richards. So you are both going to play Richard, and you are both going to play Bolingbroke. Probably, I think, in terms of today, we'll probably switch. My thought is that I'd like to spend today sort of looking at the text and making sure that we've got a good handle on exactly what we're saying, because it is beautiful language. But I think the danger, and I don't have to tell, I have to tell you this, everyone in this room is a seasoned professional, but just to say it, I think the danger when working on really gorgeous language is that we can rely on the beauty of the language to carry us, and we don't get down to the sense of it. And I think that the really sort of the interesting line that this play walks is that we are always, yes, it is beautiful, but there's still a game being played, and there's still it is still argumentation, and especially in this scene. So I want to make sure that we've got a very clear sense of that. And then I think probably the way that we will structure this is we will one day Jamal will be playing Richard, and Nick will be playing Bolingbroke, and then the following session we'll flip flop them. And through that, in terms of like the production, or in terms of like what your Richard or what your Bolingbroke is, we're going to discover that together. Today is about getting sort of our sea legs under us when it comes to what we're saying. And then from there, I don't want to, the only thing I'll say in the playing of it is I don't know that either of you need to worry about putting anything on for these characters. Let's see what happens if Jamal is what is Jamal as Richard and Jamal as Bolingbroke, and what is Nick as Richard and Nick as Bolingbroke. This is sort of mirroring a very famous production from the RSA in 1974, I want to say, where Richard Pascoe and Ian Richardson alternated the title roles. So this has a performance precedent. It sounds like a backbreaking amount of work. But again, and I hope this is one of the last things that I say before I turn it over to the brilliant Miranda Johnson-Haddad, mirror, and this is the last, mirrors and self-regard are sort of key recurring themes. Richard is frequently described as, even after he's dead, long after he's dead, Richard is described as vain. Richard is described as shallow. In Henry IV, he's described as the skipping king. And of course, there's the conversation about, well, how much of that is history actively being written by the victor? But there in this play, and this is, we are in, it's interesting. I just finished listening to Simon Russell Beale's autobiography, and he played Richard II very late in life. He played it after he played King Lear. But he played Richard II in late 2019. And he said that, like, they had no idea the resonance that this play was going to take on, but they did it in sort of the last year before COVID redefined how we engage with the world, right? And that it ended up retroactively working on this really beautiful meta-theatrical way, because that is exactly what's happening in Richard II. The only other thing that I want to throw at you guys is that Richard is the last of the kings who can actually say, I am anointed by God, right? Because Bolingbroke, whether or not Richard is a good king, Bolingbroke is a usurper. And it is Bolingbroke's status as a usurper that is the engine behind the entirety of the Wars of the Roses, all the way to Richard III, right? It's that random guy Mortimer, right? Who's in one scene in Henry IV Part 1. Everybody thinks they're trying to put Hotspur on the throne. They're trying to put Edmund Mortimer on the throne. He's in one scene in Henry IV Part 1. I think I can swear on this. He fucks off for 3 plays and then comes back in one scene in Henry VI Part 1 to tell his nephew Richard, future Duke of York, that he's the actual heir to the throne, and then he dies, which might mean that Edmund Mortimer is like the most troublesome character in this entire 8-play cycle. What a shit. But anyways, that is truly beside the point. It is this sort of cardinal sin. It's this breaking of the world that is the engine behind 100 years of bloodshed in English history, and it is behind the schism. And I think it is testament to Shakespeare's generosity of spirit, and it is testament, I think, to Shakespeare's, or whoever wrote them, the company. They were a team effort, but it is testament to this play's generosity of spirit that that at no point is the actual act of deposition taken out of context. We are shown just how bad of a king Richard is. We are shown just how justified this is, and everyone gets to go home and make their own decision. All right, I've talked enough. Miranda.
Thanks, Will. That was great. I agree with every single thing you said. And I'm mulling over a couple of things. Some of when you talk about gender and how we can play around with casting, the great Fiona Shaw, of course, very famously played Richard in the I want to say, what was it, 1994, 1996, the mid 1990s, directed by Deborah Warner, and that you can find that production to watch as well. I tracked it down during COVID, and that's remarkable. And then, of course, more recently, Harriet Walter played Henry IV in a trio of films put on by all-female casts, The Tempest, both parts of Henry IV condensed, and Julius Caesar. So thank you for reminding me of that. Just very quickly about history, and just sort of leaping off from what Will was saying. This play is so extraordinary, I think, because I agree 100% that we are shown that Richard is a bad king and worthy of being deposed, and yet it also sets into motion, as you say, this series of unfortunate events that just become worse and worse and worse with each king, until finally we have Richard III, and who is overcome by Henry VII, by Henry Tudor, thus ending the Wars of the Roses, which of course was not what people said during the time. They did not walk around saying, here we are, fighting the Wars of the Roses, despite that silly scene in Henry VI when they're pulling off a red rose and a white rose. So the sort of, as you say, the victor gets to write history. and yet Richard was certainly an irresponsible king, and yet he was also God's anointed. And I think what's so fascinating to me is that Shakespeare it writes this play and tells that particular story, and which balances on the edge of a knife. And the deposition scene in particular was really literally almost just considered too hot to handle. It was not performed originally when the play was performed at the Globe. Very famously, when the Earl of Essex in 1601 tried to raise up a rebellion against Queen Elizabeth I, he commissioned the Lord Chamberlain's men, Shakespeare's troupe, to perform Richard II with the deposition scene in it, and he failed to muster the requisite support. He was arrested and he was executed for his role in that rebellion. And Elizabeth is purported to have remarked irritably, but understandably, to one of her counselors, "I am Richard II, know ye not that?" So just the way that history, history begets art, begets history, and the intersection, I think, of history and of art in this play in particular, and in the Henrys as well, really fascinates me. As Nathan mentioned, it's all verse. There's a line of prose in it, and this scene in particular, I think, is so full of theatrical and dramatic potential. There's just so many ways you can go, but as Will says, Richard really does dominate the scene. And yet there are so many moments in which that can be expressed. When I would teach this play to undergraduates, or sometimes I repeat this technique when I'm teaching teachers, as I do sometimes at A Noise Within with the undergraduates. I went to my local toy store. I got one of those little sort of fake kitty crowns, and had them staging it, and just to have the physical embodiment of a crown in the classroom. It just made it all so real for them, and I think for us as well, it can, when we are picturing this. Here cousin sees the crown, and then what does he do? Does he hold on to the crown? Does he, just countless possibilities. And I also want to mention that as a performance critic, I'm constantly thinking about other productions I have seen, of the choices in the moment. If I bring something like that up, it's just to give us another possibility to reflect upon. And if I'm getting to be a pain with doing that too much, or it's being oppressive, just tell me, great, Miranda, thank you so much. Let's move on. Because one reason I like to think why I'm able to be helpful as a dramaturg is that I'm very clear about where my gifts and yours begin. I'm not a director, I'm not an actor, and I offer things in the spirit of, as Will says, of collaboration and of discussion. But that said, I'm just elated to be working on this play. It is the second tetralogy that Shakespeare wrote, even though chronologically these are the events that come first. But he wrote the first tetralogy, the three parts of Henry VI and Richard III. He wrote that earlier, and indeed parts of Henry VI we think are a collaboration. But this one, you can tell he was really sort of hitting his stride, probably written around 1595, 1596. He was writing Midsummer. He was really, I think, beginning to branch out, to be braver as an artist, and you can really see it in as well as the lyrical, just gorgeousness of the verse. It's just one of the most beautiful plays, I think, linguistically, of any of them. So just a few historical points there. I can add others as we go along, but I'm here in service of all of you, which is, I think, the dramaturg's role. And as another dramaturg who's been active longer than I have says, the basic role of the dramaturg is to provide information, and the main qualification is you have to love theater. So that I have. I'm grateful to my parents who took us to theater when we were very young. And I will say, Will, you know this, I think, that the very first Shakespeare production I ever saw, I was 11 years old, was in Stratford-on-Avon in England, and it was the Peter Brook Midsummer Night's Dream. Yeah, in 1970, I was 11, as I say, and that was just so revolutionary, not just in terms of how we understand Midsummer, but how we understand and perform Shakespeare. And it was a great beginning. So I'm really happy to be here, everybody.
I didn't know that, Miranda.
Oh, you haven't heard me say that in all the times you've listened to me natter on?
or I've had like I've had a couple. I don't know. For some reason, I didn't remember that. That's insane. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
it really was pretty amazing, because that was the first play that did the double casting, of course, and yeah, really was remarkable. Yeah, great way to get started on what for me has been a lifelong joy. Mm. Mm.
Thank you, Miranda. And it's excellent to have you here.
Thank you. Mm.
All right, well, friends, before we start reading, we've sort of been chatting to you, and I want to make sure to sort of establish right from the get go that this is a conversation. So before we dive into reading the text, I just wanted to open up to Nick and Jamal and see either of you guys did that sort of resonate with you or spark anything, or were there things that we want to discuss as actors at the top before we dive in? Everything is fair game.
Absolutely. I'm loving the conversation. I'm someone that likes to receive as much information as possible because I kind of exist out there in the esoteric ether. And so bringing things back to town, back to the ground is like important for me with information because I feel more than I know, which I think is a gift of mine. And you were speaking about mirrors and these universal things that are going on here. And I started thinking about that. What time are you the king within, right? Because that affects what is the soul of the people and the awareness. And sometimes you can be ahead of the times, yet still a messenger, though foolish, and I think about like mystical tales, like, like the tarot deck, right? The tower falling is actually a great thing. It's a blessing, just like the fool is actually a freedom sense, not the fool. And so I those images of that mirror comes up for me as I look at what King Richard is saying in this piece, and then looking at the time and then the mirror of our time, right? Like everybody wants freedom, but the way we want it looks differently in this time. And so there's a mirror, I think, that exists within this and the wonderful language in this piece that exists through all generations or through all times, if your eyes are open or not. And so I like that aspect of it because there's a lot of deep spiritual universal concepts that exist within King Richard. And it seems like he's in the midst of that questioning while still knowing. It's that dark night of the soul. It's that Buddha leaving the castle and everything that they have and choosing to give it up to be nothing, which is a spiritual concept. And in that time, we've had president, I think about Marianne Williamson, right? Running for president. It's like, oh, you too spiritual for us, baby girl. Go over there. Like, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. No, that's not this town. We might gotta fight. No. And so those are things that are coming up for me in the universal mirror. Again, if your eyes are open or not, you see what you see. And I think that's all beautiful, which is what makes humanity and the soul so complex, yet it's all one dancing together to make whatever happens next. And so I love the questioning in the middle path that this seems to be on, a strong choice, but still a questioning. And that's the whole concept of being nothing, knowing something, but also remembering that I don't know it all because I can't, and to be willing to say it is why I think this is all profound. He says the things that we dream about and wake up thinking about, but feel too afraid or ashamed or too in the unknowing void space to know, to put words to it. But he puts words to what stills the room and what wakes up the audience. And so it makes sense why it wasn't performed, because I think at one point, because people probably weren't ready. I think we're more ready now in our world, but as a totality in the large, still not ready. Yeah. And so those are things coming up for me beneath the surface, being a feeler first. And so throw all the information at me, throw history at me. I'll probably be digesting it all today and more quiet or not. I'm long-winded too, but those are things coming up for me in this space and time.
No, I love everything you just said, and I also want to sort of say, Nathan, if we're titling these episodes "What Time Are You the King Within," is absolutely, I think, would be a phenomenal episode title, and I think really, I mean, it cuts sort of right, because I think it cuts right to the core of this, right, and And I'm glad that you brought that up too, because that was something I have so much coffee in me right now. My brain is like, um, uh, just to sort of build on that a little bit, is that seeing and knowing are two recurring, because the mirror. And I love that you also sort of brought up this idea of mist, right? Because I think exactly right. Like what Richard says in this scene stops the room cold, right? And how much of that is because he's like seeing, how much of that is because he's seeing himself and seeing everyone around him clearly, right? There are lies that we tell ourselves and we tell each other so that we can all just like get on with our days. And then there's sometimes there's that one person who stands up and says, actually, yeah, I love that, Jamal. Excellent. Nick, anything?
Yeah, I too was thinking about the mirrors. I was thinking about sort of there's almost a switch that happens, and Miranda, you can help me with this. It's been a while since I've worked in this play, but it seems that the audience could nearly be against Richard in the beginning of this play and for Bolingbroke, and then there's a shift that happens somewhere in the middle where we realize Richard almost begins to take on a heroism, and Bolingbroke's usurpation becomes, the audience becomes aware of the negativity involved in something like that. And it's so interesting to me. I didn't know very much about the story that they put on this play in front of Queen Elizabeth when there was almost a talk, a discussion about taking her crown from her. You brought that up, and I had heard that story a little bit before, but how fascinating that they used this piece of art and played it for her right before that.
Yeah, and Essex, of course, had been the Earl of Essex had been one of her favorites. So for him to lead this, rebellion against her, and then her sense of betrayal and so on. So it really exists, I think, this play on multiple levels. The historical facts, whatever they actually were. There's an element of it, I think, that was Tudor propaganda, certainly by the Tudor historians. There's the power of art, which and spirituality, which Richard, I agree with you 100% with Jamal and Nick. Richard, becomes at the end, somehow paradoxically, but he becomes, I feel, more he has more depth and more poetry and in a sense more soul than Bolingbroke. I saw a production once where the final scene was Bolingbroke, Henry IV, on the throne, and just piles of shrouded bloodstained bodies just piling up around him, which was pretty significant, and given then what his reign went on to be. So it's a remarkable thing, I think, that it was used in this way, and that this scene in particular that we're thinking about together was seen as just it was unperformable until it wasn't.
Well, and it's very Catholic, isn't it? I mean, he is very that would be the religion at the time, but Richard, time and again, is sort of like painting himself as some sort of martyr, which again at the time is such a dangerous thing to do, because it's the Catholic, and I'd never thought of this until you started talking about it, but like Bolingbroke sort of seems to uphold all of the Protestant values of practicality and accessibility, and it's very Timothy West was Ian McKellen's Bolingbroke, and he described himself as a red wine actor to Ian McKellen's white wine actor. But I wonder but that's kind of the thing, right? It's like Bolingbroke starts off, we start off trusting Bolingbroke because he's one of the guys, right? And he's more accessible, and he talks our language, right? And then he gets to the throne, and we realize he's not actually going to do the common people any more good than Richard. And Richard is all iconography, and he's sort of remote, and he's entirely reliant on this relationship with God to justify his place too. But I'm just realizing, even from that, I mean, and I think everyone, Shakespeare's, what was it, his paternal grandfather was executed as part of a Catholic plot. There's evidence.
There's some theory that his father was a recusant who paid the fines to not go to Protestant mass. even before that, I'm not sure. I'd have to double check that, but certainly there was this questionable commitment to Protestantism in Shakespeare's background, which was dangerous. And of course, by 1601, again, when the rebellion occurred, Elizabeth would die in 1603, and there was happily a more or less peaceful transfer of power, but the English people were anxious. She was dying unmarried, childless, no heir, and she had an heir. She'd named James the First, but there was a lot of concern that the country would be plunged into civil war again. And the other thing, and well, I hadn't really thought of this in quite this way until what you just said. I mean, Richard really becomes an accurate prophet by the end of the play. He says to Northumberland at one point, Northumberland, it's that great line, "Thou ladder, wherewithal Bolingbroke ascends the throne," and then goes into this speech about, there's going to come a time when you're going to think that even if Richard were to divide the kingdom and give you half, it wouldn't be enough. And then indeed, Northumberland and the Percys were constantly fomenting rebellion against Henry IV. So that he accurately foresees that is really shows, I think, his changed status or spirituality. Again, he's become a seer in a way, as I say, an accurate prophet, which he's very far from being at the beginning.
Yeah.
A conduit of truth, and something about what happens when you give up everything. You're not always consciously aware of what you were speaking. This happens in my life all the time, and people think that I'm consciously aware. It's like, no, this is flowing through me. And something that was said too, like when you get to the point where you see yourself in everything, basic human psychology, there is no surprises. You know what I mean? It becomes all quite simple. Lauryn Hill said it, I like shift love songs to spiritual songs. It could all be so simple, but you rather make it hard. But when you look at human behavior and you begin to see yourself in everything and everyone, the thing that you're prophesying is also just a simple truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And it leads me to think about how Richard sees himself as part of the land, almost as part of England, being endowed by God. When he has that conversation and he puts his hand on the shores and talks to the land as if he and the land are the same.
Yeah.
Which is Arthurian, right? The king, the land thrives when the king thrives. The land declines when the king declines. That's
the conduit of truth. It makes me think of what you said. It flows through him. Yeah.
And the wonderful thing about that is Shakespeare does this all the time. Like, the conduit of truth comes through all beings in Shakespeare. Like, sometimes it's not the ones in power. Sometimes it's the maid or the fool or the drunkard. We used to say this in the church, and I'm pretty many other people have said this too. Nothing is new under the sun, but even a liar can tell you the truth. And so it's even like when you talk about the identity that you have when you're the king, it's like, just because you're the king don't mean you're the only holder of truth. And the gag is that sometimes you can be blinded by the crown that's on your head that you can't see clearly, and when you think about those historical prophets, you can go through to whatever religion or mystical tale. Honestly, it's the same story and everything. You can go to superhero stories. I say this all the time, but it's just that when you think you are the one, you still have to face everything that comes with that, because if we are the one, you being the one, you're going to run into yourself and have to fall if you think you are. And I love that in the paradox of it all, that we all have to experience that within the mirror of your existence, right? I think that's beautiful poetry.
Yeah. Well, and it's brought up even in the scene, right? Flattering glass that, like to my followers in prosperity, thou dost beguile me, right? Can you even, if you've got that thing on, can you even, and I think that's what you're saying, but can you even trust what you are seeing just because the mirror is there? Do you have the ability to recognize what you're looking at? This is all great. I'd love to transition us to looking at text. Just a couple of questions. So everyone is getting, I'm going to play everyone else. Sorry. But I think it's only like 3 lines. So we're going to start with the entrance of Richard. Alack, why am I sent for to a king? I think that is line 170, if you're going off the Folger document. So just a couple of questions, and these are really just sort of extensions of the conversation that we've been talking about. But if you're, if you're basically for both parts, the main question that I want to sort of, I don't need an answer right now, but just be thinking about is how right do you think you are in this circumstance? Are you coming in, if you're Richard, are you coming in with the full weight of God and they are committing a crime, or are you coming in sort of, you know, I think this sort of was sparked by talking about the sort of by the connection to the land, right, in the Arthurian. Because I think certainly that opens up an interesting fork in the road, because is this something that he genuinely believes, or is this something that he is performing so that everyone around him will believe that he is a king? And I think I think that's the central question. And it's not, I am not, like, I'm not going either way. I think play it whatever makes the most sense to you, right? Because both are absolutely valid. But I think the central question for Richard is, does he genuinely believe this, or does he secretly believe that he is absolutely not worthy? And I think that's also a spectrum, right? I think even over the course of that scene, you know, we can keep our little sort of, we'll call it the holiness barometer, right? Like, where, you know, is he at full XP or is he at half? And with Bolingbroke, because I also want to, even though Richard does, one thing I want to sort of say right off the bat before we dive in, is even though Bolingbroke doesn't have as much text as Richard, Bolingbroke is an equal player in this scene. And I think that is, oh, that's one other thing that I forgot to talk about because I had way too much caffeine in my system. I really do think that even though this is Richard II, this is the story of these two people, and the tension between them, right? And it is their journey together. And indeed, Bolingbroke is a much larger character in this play than he is in his own plays. My Henry IV and I was Hal. My Henry IV and I loved part 2 because I was in 4 scenes and she was in 2, and the rest of the time we just got to sit. It was awesome. Anyways, if you're Bolingbroke, I think this like the train has left the station, right? There is no stopping it. So I think the question for a Bolingbroke, you are getting the crown. Is that something you asked for, or is that not something that you wanted, right? And again, I think that can change over the course of the scene. We get I had a voice teacher call it your willingness level. When you enter the room, are you super excited to be there? Are you not so excited? And it was the best piece of advice I got. Amy Chafee, if you're listening, it was the best piece of advice I ever got from an acting teacher. She said, don't force your willingness level. That will result in dishonest acting. Just be wherever you're at. I was like, oh, cool. So, but what's Richard's holiness level and what's Bolingbroke's willingness level? Now, this is going to be a lot of start and stop, but not immediately. I want to do one tilt at the scene without stopping, but that said, I want to make sure that both people have a chance to read both parts. So, we're going to do something a little bit tricksy, and we're going to switch halfway through. So I would like for us to start the scene from Alack, Why Am I Sent For to a King, with Jamal reading King Richard and Nick reading Bolingbroke. And then, oh, I scrolled the wrong direction. I should be living in like an Oxford Don's accommodations in like the mid 1950s. I'm not built for the world of computers. Give me 1 second. I would like for us to switch after line 231, which is What More Remains. So Jamal, you're going to read Richard all the way through to the end of that giving the heavy weight from off my head speech. Mm-hmm. And at that point, it's going to go to me because that's a Northumberland line. But then from Must I Do So, Nick, you take over King Richard, and Jamal, you read Bolingbroke. And this is just for, and I think it's about the halfway point-ish. But that way we can take a tilt at it. Everybody can take a tilt at both parts, and then we can go back and sort of, and then when we go back and we start actually nitpicking, we'll flip-flop those. But don't worry about that for right now. Okay, we all good to go?
Yes.
Alrighty. Sorry, give me 1 second. All right. Jamal, when you are ready, take us away.
Okay. Alack, why am I sent for to a king before I have shook off the regal thoughts wherewith I reigned? I hardly yet have learned to insinuate, flatter, bow, and bend my knee. Give sorrow leave a while to tutor me to this submission. Yet I well remember the favors of these men. Were they not mine? Did they not sometime cry, all hell to me? So Judas did to Christ, but he in 12 found truth in all but one. I in 12,000, none. God save the king. Will no man say amen? Am I both priest and clerk? Well then, amen. God save the king, although I be not he, and yet, amen, if heaven do think him me. To do what service am I sent for hither?
To do that office of thine own good will, which tired majesty did make thee offer, the resignation of thy state and crown to Henry Bolingbroke.
Give me the crown. Here, cousin, seize the crown. Here, cousin. On this side my hand, on that side thine. Now is this golden crown like a deep well that owes two buckets filling one another. The emptier ever dancing in the air, the other down, unseen and full of water. The bucket down and full of tears am I, drinking my griefs, whilst you mount up on high.
Nick, that's you.
Sorry, I lost my place. There we are. I thought you had been willing to resign.
My crowned am I, but still my griefs are mine. You may my glories and my state dispose, but not my griefs. Still am I king of those.
Part of your cares you give me with your crown, with your crown.
Your cares set up do not pluck my cares down. My care is loss of care, by old care done. Your care is gain of care, by new care won. The cares I give, I have, though given away. They tend to the crown, yet still with me they stay.
Are you contented to resign the crown?
Aye, no, aye. For I must nothing be, therefore no. No, for I resign to thee. Now, mark me how I will undo myself. I give this heavy weight from off my head, and this unwieldy scepter from my hand. The pride I kingly sway from out of my heart. With my own tears, I wash away my balm. With my own hands, I give away my crown. With my own tongue, deny my sacred state. With my own breath, release all duteous oaths. All pomp and majesty I do forswear. My manners, rents, revenues I forego. My acts, decrees, and statutes I deny. God pardon all oaths that are broke to me. God keep all vows unbroke are made to thee. Make me that nothing have, with nothing grieved, and thou with all pleased that hast all achieved. Long mayest thou live in Richard's seat to sit, and soon lie Richard in an earthy pit. God save King Henry. Unkinged Richard says, and send him many years of sunshine days. What more remains?
No more, but that you read these accusations and these grievous crimes committed by your person and your followers against the state and profit of this land, that by confessing them, the souls of men may deem that you are worthily deposed.
Must I do so? And must I ravel out my weaved up follies? Gentle Northumberland, if thy offences were upon record, would it not shame thee in so fair a troop to read a lecture of them? If thou wouldst, there shouldst find one heinous article containing the deposing of a king and cracking the strong warrant of an oath, marked with a blot, damned in the book of heaven? Nay, all of you that stand and look upon me, whilst that my wretchedness doth bate myself, Though some of you with Pilate wash your hands, showing an outward pity, yet you pilots have here delivered me my sour cross, and water cannot wash away your sin.
My lord, dispatch, read o'er these articles.
Mine eyes are full of tears, I cannot see. Yet salt water blinds them not so much, but they can see a sort of traitors here. Nay, if I turn mine eyes upon myself, I find myself a traitor with the rest. For I have given here my soul's consent to undeck the pompous body of a king, made glory base and sovereignty a slave, proud majesties a subject, state a peasant.
My lord.
No lord of thine, thou hot insulting man, nor no man's lord. I have no name, no title. No, not that name was given me at the font, but 'tis usurped. Alack, the heavy day that I have worn so many winters out, and know not now what name to call myself. Oh, that I were a mockery, king of snow, standing before the son of Bolingbroke to melt myself away in water drops. Good king, great king, and yet not greatly good. And if my word be sterling yet in England, let it command a mirror hither straight, that it may show me what a face I have, since it is bankrupt of his majesty.
Go, some of you, and fetch a looking glass.
Read o'er this paper while the glass doth come.
Fiend, thou torments me ere I come to hell.
Urge it no more, my lord Northumberland.
Commons will not then be satisfied.
They shall be satisfied, I'll read enough. When I do see the very book indeed, where all my sins are writ, and that's myself. Give me that glass, and therein I will read. No deeper wrinkles yet. Hath sorrow struck so many blows upon this face of mine, and made no deeper wounds? Oh, flattering glass, like to my followers in prosperity. Dost thou beguile me? Was this face the face that every day under his household roof did keep 10,000 men? Was this the face that like the sun did make beholders wink? Is this the face which faced so many follies, that was at last outfaced by Bolingbroke? A brittle glory shineth in this face, as brittle as the glory is the face. For there it is, cracked in 100 shivers. Mark, silent king, the moral of this sport. How soon my sorrow hath destroyed my face.
The shadow of your sorrow hath destroyed the shadow of your face.
Say that again. The shadow of my sorrow. Let's see. 'Tis very true. My grief lies all within. And these external manners of laments are merely shadows to the unseen grief that swells with silence in the tortured soul. There lies the substance. And I thank thee, king, for thy great bounty that not only gives me cause to wail, but teaches me the way how to lament the cause. I'll beg one boon, and then shall be gone, and trouble you no more. Shall I obtain it?
Name it, fair cousin.
Fair cousin, I am greater than a king. For when I was a king, my flatterers were then but subjects. Being now a subject, I have a king here to my flatterer. Being so great, I have no need to beg.
Yet ask.
And shall I have?
You shall.
And give me leave to go.
Whither?
Whither you will. So I were from your sights.
Go, some of you. Convey him to the tower.
Oh, good convey. Conveyors are you all. that rise thus nimbly by a true king's fall.
Such a good scene.
It's brilliant.
Such a good scene.
You know what? I know that we said we were going to end it. Does everybody have the Folger thing?
Yeah.
Great. I'm going to say, for the interest of us working, let's actually end it one line later so that we can keep this Bolingbroke on Wednesday next. We solemnly set down our coronation, lords, prepare yourselves. The only reason I didn't include it originally, but the only reason I'm saying that is because if we are investigating this tension between Richard and Bolingbroke, Shakespeare doesn't give Richard the last line, the last word. And so I want us to investigate what receiving that does to whoever's playing Bolingbroke. So we'll tack that on. No need to go back, but spotlight on Jamal. Now deliver that line.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
But
on Wednesday next, we solemnly set down our coronation. Lords, prepare yourselves.
Knocked it out of the park. But just so as we move forward, I just want us to have that there because I think it is actually more important than I had originally thought. Yeah, it's such a good scene, and the thing that leapt out at me, which again I just want to, it's such a general, like I don't have general thoughts right now, but like Richard's funny, like as a person, he's like his use of language and his sense of play with language is he's so facile and he's so inventive. Like I love puns, but I love that he says, like, though some of you with Pilate wash your hands, showing an outward pity, yet you pilots appear to, like, it's Pilate like Pontius Pilate, but then Pilate like, airplane pilot, or like, that it's he's in his element. And part of me, like, there's part of Richard, and again, this is a little bit editorial, but Richard's a drama mama. Like, no matter who Richard is, this is someone who absolutely thrives in the spotlight. And he does it, like, right from the word go, right? Even in Act 1, Scene 1, it's that great couplet of, this we prescribe, though no physician, too deep malice makes too deep incision. And, like, his chorus, his gaggle of, and it's in full production, it's heartbreaking, because the first time that he makes a pun, he's surrounded by a bunch of people who laugh and applaud for him. And now he's greeted with just crushing fucking silence. But he keeps going, and I think that's the important thing. Anyways, yeah, beautiful read, friends. I want to open it up for thoughts and impressions.
Bolingbroke's hard because I was mesmerized by Jamal that I forget to say the lines.
And
he pops in every now and then, and you're like, oh yeah.
Well, I think that it's interesting that you mentioned that, because when we flipped, I also had that feeling listening to you. Because again, it's something that does slow down the room. He is speaking something that is beneath the surface that most of us can't know. I don't even think himself. Like, I think it's a deeper feeling than a knowing. I really do. I really do think it's that space in between. And for me, I like Richard being in that space in between, asking the big questions. It sounds as if he knows, but he really doesn't, because to know anything is to know nothing. And I think he plays upon that. He plays with it. Even when he's looking at himself in the mirror, he's like, oh, all this truth, all these things, and I have not been marred. Oh. And then he crashes it, because it's like, if we are, then I am, even though I'm still cute, though.
He loves an audience, maybe, Richard, it seems.
He absolutely does.
Yeah.
And I think he's always loved his reflection too. Like, it's but Jamal, I love what you just said, and I want to uphold it, and I'm gonna, like, I tend to be a very technical director when it comes to the verse. I want to sort of uphold that as like the gold standard, especially if you're playing Richard. It's absolutely always a discovery. I think absolutely. And I think the only reason that I'm flagging it right now is because, not just because it's a good rule of thumb for playing verse, but also because I think up until this point of the play, maybe up to the Hollow Crown speech, I think maybe right up to the Hollow Crown speech, Richard is doing that thing that I don't know if you got social anxiety or not, but speaking
yeah.
Speaking for myself, there's sometimes a danger when you find yourself in a room with a lot of very intelligent or powerful people, right? And there's sometimes, I often feel pressure to appear very put together and always know exactly what I'm talking about. And that sometimes results in, like, there's like you ever get that like low drone, or like get that bird's eye view of yourself, and you're just like, you fucking idiot. You can be saying it doesn't matter what you're saying, right? You're like
Yeah.
you've like you were quietly while the person in front while the last person was talking, you've been quietly rehearsing what you're going to say, and then you say it, right? And there's an element of that. Like Richard is he's very fun and he's very creative and he's all of these things, but he's a little bit restrained and a little bit stilted in the early scenes of the play. And it's like he sets himself on fire. It's like he catches fire. Like there is something, like you've really hit the nail on the head. There's something about this scene, and there is something about him being able to see himself and not give a fuck, or do give a fuck, and sort of to be able to like surmount that for the first time in his life. But it's absolutely always a discovery.
And it's in that space too, like, listen, I mean, we all go to sleep, we all dream, and we all wake up with ourselves, regardless of who's next to us. And sometimes with these thoughts, you feel kind of crazy, you know? And so, like, even though you're saying it so clean, after you say it and you hear what you just said, like these things, that's the thing about embodying these truths in this realm. It's hard to perfectly, which is why you work on the balance of it. And so there's moments where like Richard is speaking, but then he hears what he just said. Because like, you know, I always say this, whatever I say out my mouth is for me in the same space and time. And so there's also like, where are you? Are you okay? You know, with it as well, that I feel like in saying these things, like there was moments when I was saying the words and I'm like, ooh, what did I just say? What did he just say?
The character explicitly has that moment. It's my favorite line in the play. Say that again. The shadow of my sorrow. Like he has that exact experience explicitly in the text. Yeah. No, beautiful. All right, friends, let's start picking this text apart. So let's remain flipped. So we'll start with Nick reading Richard and Jamal reading Bolingbroke, and then when we get to that same point, we'll flip again. So everybody will have had a chance to read everything. I want to keep as much as possible, because I think the deeper we get into this, I think the more I'm convinced that I want one day to be Nick Day, or one day to be sort of, this is the last time we're going to switch in the middle of the session. So for today, as much as possible, and this is a reminder to myself as much as anybody, let's try and keep the discussion as close to just understanding the words on the page as possible. And the only reason that I'm saying that's not generally how I work, but the only reason that I'm saying that is I want to make sure that if we are talking about Jamal's Richard in a future episode, that is not influenced by anything, by any character discussion that happens today at the table, and likewise with Nick, and likewise for the Bolingbrokes too. So I imagine these lines in the sand are not going to be very clearly maintained, and that's not the end of the world. But I just want to, the only thing that I want to say before we start getting in the nitty gritty is Nick and Jamal, for me, the most important thing as we go forward is how these parts are resonating with you in the moment. And so if somebody says something about one of these parts that you don't agree with, that's totally okay, and hold on to that. It's like I'm sort of asking you guys to sing like 2-part harmony, right? Which is something I'm terrible at. So hold on to your part. If you disagree, that's good. It's going to make for a great podcast.
If you love Shakespeare, you gotta love that disagree. Wait, hold on. That thought though. So I'm excited for that actually.
Oh yeah, me too. Final thoughts before we dive in?
No, well, I wanted to ask Miranda a little bit about, and maybe for myself and our audience, the history between Bolingbroke and Richard, and the banishment that happens a little earlier in the play. Just because I feel like part of their relationship in this scene is based on the fact that he was sent away for 6 years or something. I'm not sure exactly what the story is, and then he came back and.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as you may remember, the play begins with conflict between Bolingbroke and Thomas Mowbray over, and the question is over Mowbray's responsibility for killing Thomas Woodstock, who was the Earl of Gloucester, who was really everything. The whole thing starts with Edward III, who had these 5 very, very ambitious sons, and then his most immediate heir dies before Edward does, and that is Richard's father. So we begin just with this conflict that is. I always say with Shakespeare, it's with the history plays, I'm always reminded of that slogan of the women's movement back in the 60s and the 70s, the personal is political. And for me, that's one of the things that always makes these history plays really pop, is that, these are historic events, but this is also a family, these are fraught family dynamics, and I'm also always reminded of what the great British actor and critic Kenneth Tynan used to say about the history plays, about Shakespeare's history plays. If you heard this one, Will, he said, he wrote at one point that the trouble with the history plays is that they contain far too many lines that sound something like, "And dost thou now presume, base Leamington, to scorn thy cousin's brother's eldest son?" And it's true, so you're sort of keeping track of these family dynamics. But yes, what's happened at the beginning here is that Henry Bolingbroke, who is Richard's cousin, he's his first cousin, is accusing Thomas Mowbray of the murder of their mutual uncle, one of these sons of Edward. And Richard very sort of peremptorily stops them from dueling, from completing their duel, which he earlier had allowed to go forward. He banishes Bolingbroke originally for 10 years. Interestingly, he banishes Mowbray for life, upon me a sterner sentence which I with some unwillingness pronounce. And we can, historians and others have speculated about that. But then it's sort of in a performative display of magnanimity, Richard looks at Bolingbroke's father, who is Richard's own uncle, John of Gaunt, time-honored Lancaster, and says, "I see how this upsets you. I'm gonna just take away 4 years, so just 6 years. You're just banished for 6 years." So from the very beginning, there's a tension there, and I'm it's always so striking when Bolingbroke leaves and Richard's cronies, basically O'Murrough, comes and they're just talking very candidly about the contempt they have for Bolingbroke. So there's these complicated. I'm going maybe a little too far astray from your question, Nick, but there's this complicated dynamic that is, as I say, a family dynamic, a historical one, political factions, and a mystery. There's the mystery of who was responsible for this murder. There is a play, Thomas of Woodstock, that is sort of it's not by Shakespeare, but it's a prequel, and I've seen productions in which the scene of Thomas of Woodstock's murder, it's sort of briefly staged before going into Richard II to try to make some context there. So it was we begin in this moment of great conflict on many levels, and including the personal, between.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a feeling of how Bolingbroke views Richard in this scene and what his feelings of Richard are.
And that I think really comes out. It depends on performance, and really particularly in that moment when Richard says, "I'm going to take away 4 years from your banishment," and Bolingbroke has this line about 4 weary winters and 4 wanton springs, gone in a moment such as the breath of kings. And I've seen actors just kind of spitting that line out in fury, and others just sort of marveling. So for me, that's what can really come out in performance. What Bolingbroke really thinks of Richard, and Richard we do learn what Richard thinks of Bolingbroke in those intervening scenes, and it's not much. He's contemptuous of him, as I say, but look how that worked out. So, but it's performance choices, I think.
Forgive me if this is something that you said and my caffeine-addled brain missed it. But there's suspicion that Richard ordered the death of Gloucester too, right?
Exactly. Yes, and I didn't specify that. It's not your caffeine-addled brain at all. Your brain is excellent. But no, that's right. There's suspicion that Richard may have ordered that murder, and that's why Mowbray feels so betrayed when Richard banishes him, for life. And does Bolingbroke know that? What's and of course this scene, the deposition scene, begins with this really almost ludicrous series of events when O'Murrough and everybody else are sort of challenging. A lot of people are challenging O'Murrough. "I support you're lying," and it's like people are throwing down their gauges one after the next, and again Shakespeare's control over the tone here is just extraordinary. I think that we go from that. I mean, it's at one finally, O'Merle has to say, "Well, some honest Christian lend me a gauge." You know, he's holding all these gloves. He doesn't have any of his own that he can throw down, and that Shakespeare can go from that scene, which is just inevitably comic, to this moment is always very very striking to me as well. So yeah, Will, you're right.
Thank you.
Yeah, too much answer, but
No, that's
great.
exactly what I mean.
Some general, just to sort of speak, to do a slight pivot as we go into text work, just a couple of general observations. This is verse. Be very cognizant of driving energy to the ends of lines. Don't worry about, like, I'm not a what is it they said that John Barton was, a verse purist? No, a verse. I'll be here all night.
you're right, but yeah.
I don't need you to, like, take the caesura at the end of a line or anything, but please do, like, king, thoughts, learned, need. These are the most important words in the line for just for sense. So make sure that we're driving to that. I'll encourage both of you gentlemen, let's not worry about any pretension. Let's not worry about a Shakespeare voice. Let's not worry about any sort of dialect. So we are speaking in our own voices. Yeah, those were only my only two initial observations. So, Nick, when you're ready, take it away. And I will call stop, and anyone can call stop at any point. Any of the four of us, and Nathan too, if you want to jump in. Anyone can call stop at any time if you want to discuss something, if you've got a question, if you've got a thought. Anyone. All right, Nick, take it away.
Alack, why am I sent for to a king, before I have shook off the regal thoughts wherewith I reigned? I hardly yet have learned to insinuate, flatter, bow, and bend my knee. Give sorrow leave a while to tutor me to this submission. Yet I well remember the favors of these men. Were they not mine? Did they not sometime cry all hail to me? So Judas did to Christ. But he in 12 found truth in all but one. I in 12,000 none. God save the king. Will no man say amen? Am I both priest and clerk? Well then, amen. God save the king, although I be not he. And yet, amen, if heaven do think him me. To do what service am I sent for hither?
Good. I'm going to stop just because it's a nice big chunk right at the beginning, and I'd like to unpack it. So, Nick, help me out. What do these first couple lines mean?
Well, it seems like he's saying 5 minutes ago I was the king, and now you're asking me to come here and treat another as the king.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not ready to do this yet. I don't know how to flatter, how to bend my knee, how to bow to someone else. He's been, as you said, he's been the king since he was 9 years old.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, since 9 years old. Yeah, this is right on the money. I think, just for sense, I think sent for is going to be, for both of you gentlemen, I think sent for is a huge thing, because I don't know that anyone has sent for you.
Oh, yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Me?
Huh? Yeah.
I said it's like me?
Yeah, me. Excuse you. So it's almost more important than king. I still need to hear king, but I definitely need to hear sent for.
Great.
And again, it's something that I would encourage, if you're Richard's, right? Agency is another huge thing for Richard, right? Because when he says later in the prison speech, I wasted time, and now doth time waste me, right? And so this is not somebody who, unless he's like stealing money from his dead uncle to go start a war in Ireland, this is not somebody who's like done a tremendous amount with his crown, right? Or that's not the impression that Shakespeare gives us. He's not the world's most enterprising king, but he is taking agency here. So it is just interesting to note where he is taking agency in his language, right? Before I have shook off the regal thoughts wherewith I reigned, right? So there's this idea of like, you shouldn't be able to send for me before I have actually abdicated, even though he is the person who first brought up the idea of abdication. Likewise, again, I would insinuate, flatter, bow, and bend my knee. I give for both of you, let's make sure we're giving each of those weight. I don't know that I'm going to take the pressure off of both of you I think if you're Richard, take your time. I'll let you know if you're being too slow, but the stage is yours, right? I think with this, give sorrow leave a while. Let's treat sorrow as a person, right? Because again, sorrow has where's the agency, right? I still have to be taught. And then I think that's the first, again, and this is the only reason I'm bringing, excuse me, my cat is making noise outside the door. No, she's gone. You'll all meet Junebug at some point. And then I think this is the first beat change, right? And again, the only reason I'm bringing this up is I think it's important to lay out exactly like what is the argument and how exactly are we making it with this language? Because I think because it is so beautiful and it is so like the verse will hold us, it is so rhythmically rich. I just want to make sure that we're sort of dialing in and getting a clear sense of that argument and how is that being made. Take it again, Nick. Let's just take it from the top again.
Alack, why am I sent for to a king? Before I have shook off the regal thoughts wherewith I reigned, I hardly yet have learned to insinuate, flatter, bow, and bend my knee. Give sorrow leave a while to tutor me to this submission. Yet I will remember the favors of these men. Were they not mine? Did they not sometime cry, all hail to me? So Judas did to Christ, but he in 12 found truth in all but one. I in 12,000 none. God save the king. Will no man say amen? Am I both priest and clerk? Well, then, amen. God save the king, although I be not he. And yet, amen, if heaven do think him me. Let me say that again. And yet, amen, if heaven do think him me. To do what service am I sent for hither?
Good, great.
To do what service am I sent for hither? So I always have to specify that line lives kind of by itself.
It lives a little by itself, and I think service. I think you can flow through again. I had a
service,
yeah. Shout out to Joe Olivieri if she's listening, who was my Shakespeare teacher, because he always said you've got like $10 to spend on a line of verse, right? So it's like what's a $4 word, what's a $3 word, what's like a 50-cent word.
Nice.
I think to do what are all like 10-cent words. Drive to service, right?
Service,
yeah,
thank you.
Sent for. God save the king, although I think I and he, right? And again, it's that seesaw, it's that mirror thing, right? The king is this other thing. And it's, again, like thinking about discovery, it's almost like, and we're not worrying about acting right now, but it is, if it is a new thought that is occurring, it's like, oh, to him in that moment, it's like, oh yeah, okay, like the king is something else. And even if I'm not him, anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. I versus he, I think, is going to help clarify that. God save the, and separate from king. And likewise, I think heaven and me are the important words rather than think. I think that we still need to hear think, but he's drawing a line between the secular and the holy, right?
Absolutely.
God save the king, although I be not he. I might not be king, but we will only say amen. Right, if heaven, if the ultimate authority is on my side. Okay, just take it from God save the king. Will no man say amen, and then we'll press on. But great adjustment, man. Really great.
God save the king. Will no man say amen? Am I both priest and clerk? Well, then, Amen. God save the king. Although I be not he, and yet amen if heaven do think him me. To do what service am I sent for hither?
Do that office of thine own good will, which tired majesty did make thee offer, the resignation of thy state and crown to Henry Bolingbroke.
Give me the crown. Here, cousin, seize the crown. Here, cousin. On this side my hand, on that side thine. Now is this golden crown like a deep well that owes two buckets, filling one another, the emptier ever dancing in the air, the other down unseen and full of water. That bucket down and full of tears am I, drinking my griefs whilst you mount up on high.
I thought you had been willing to resign.
My crown I am, but still my griefs are mine. You may my glories and my deep state depose, but not my griefs. Still am I king of those.
Part of your cares you give me with your crown.
No, I.
Well, I think we jumped. But that's okay because
Oh yeah, sorry. My bad. My bad.
No, that's okay. We needed to stop and go back. It's all very clear. It's all great. The thing that's striking me too is just how clear the text is, right? Like I'm not feeling a need to like check a footnote or anything. Like it's all on first hearing or even on first reading. It's very like the imagery is powerful, but it's simple.
And it's very intimate too.
Yeah, expound.
This conversation is being had. Sure, there's people around, and it's happening in a public space. But there's something that, because it's speaking to the heart with these big ideas, it's like it zooms all the way in. And like I was thinking, like your note of like, this is us speaking, is bringing that clarity to me because it's piercing to the heart, which makes it intimate, although this is something happening in public. And then there's moments when it becomes public. Let me lay down like the public figure that I am, this and that and this and this. Is there anything else? Yeah. You know, and so there's something that it goes between this intimacy, to your question, Nick, with this history between Bolingbroke and Richard, you know? That's something that's coming up right now in this moment.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting, sort of dialing back to that on that line and sort of dialing back to what Miranda said. It's like Bolingbroke and Richard, like they like on paper they seem like they would be cousins and like remote cousins, right? But they really do sort of behave like siblings occasionally, don't they? Like
brothers almost. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but like it's in that way. I mean, like we all just came for Thanksgiving, right? But it's like, but in that moment where it's like the people surrounding them, become like a weapon, right? It's like you're deploying the fact that it's a public conversation, which it's just what you said, Jamal. It's like you're deploying the fact that it's a public conversation, for whatever reason. Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And they also,
and it's that mirror image too, like the poetry of so Judas did to Christ as well. And so that's another mirroring that like, again, these beings represent something bigger than them about society in that time. And these two beings in this time represent something bigger than it is. But it's the personal and the collective like coming together in this moment.
Yeah, it feels like Bolingbroke has the power and Richard is taking power with language. You know, it's almost like Bolingbroke's silence represents the power. Like he is the quiet king. And Richard is battling it with words.
Well, and there's two sides to that. And again, like, thank you. You were about to preempt my question, which is why isn't Bolingbroke saying anything? And I feel like that is one answer. And the other answer is he's legitimate. Like, that's just not how he operates, right?
He's a quiet guy, yeah.
Quiet guy, or Richard is legitimately like besting him and humiliating him. And how much can Bolingbroke say, right? Like it is, you've cut, again, Nick, you two are smart. But Nick, you've cut right to the heart of it, right? Because it's about the nature of power. Bolingbroke should have all of the power in this situation. Bolingbroke has the army. Richard is in prison. All of Richard's supporters are either dead or they've run away. And yet it's not just about Richard taking power, but Bolingbroke's hands are tied in a way that Richard's aren't. Because Bolingbroke is about to have to go and be king now, right? And there's certain what's fascinating too. I don't know. What's fascinating was listening to, and it's not in this scene, but in the scene where Richard is complaining about to a Merle about Bolingbroke. There's a point where he says, you know, we note how I'm going to butcher the line, but basically how much popularity he had with the common people, right?
Oh,
That he
we did observe it, yeah. And he sort of enters on that line. I think in that scene we did observe, you know, it's sort of the conversation is in medias res, you know, that yeah, I noticed how popular he was, and then that plays out later in the play.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, we did
and the
observe.
fact that I think there's a specific. I'm a highly trained professional. There is a specific image that's sticking in my head of him, like off goes his bonnet.
Oh, off goes his bonnet to an oyster wench.
Right?
Yeah,
He's not maintaining his status, and
yeah.
it's why like I wish that there was more money in the classical theater period, but it's so great when you do all of the plays together, right? Because what Richard's complaints about Bolingbroke and how sort of like common he is allowing himself to be turn into Bolingbroke's complaints about his own son. Bolingbroke in the next play says the skipping king he ambled up and down with, you know, made himself something to popularity, right? Or thieved himself to popularity, right? Which we know wasn't the case, and Richard was saying that just about Bolingbroke when he wasn't the king, right? That like whoever's wearing the crown is staring at whoever isn't, and it's like, God, everyone loves that guy.
Yeah, and that's so interesting, Will, that what you're saying about he's sort of Richard's complaining that Bolingbroke is lowering his status, whereas the way I've always sort of envisioned that is that he's so popular because he's respectful even of an oyster wench. You know, he's it's a sort of he's hobnobbing with the common people with respect, and then of course then that's what he complains about. And can no one tell me of my unthrifty son, you know, which is all we hear in this play about Hal. But yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
Mhm.
The only thing, and sort of the only reason that I'm asking us to stop and go back is that we're about to go into this very sort of we're about to start finishing each other's sentences, and we're about to start finishing each other's rhymes, right? And so these two sort of looking at this mirror thing, like we're about to start going into like these two weirdly end up in sync for a moment on a certain level. Can we just take it back to the other down, unseen and full of water, that bucket down and full of tears am I, drinking my griefs, which also like drinking my griefs is going to be the title of my memoir. Well, the Will Block story. Anyways, continue.
The other down unseen and full of water. That bucket down and full of tears am I, drinking my griefs while you mount up on high.
I thought you had been willing to resign.
My crown I am, but still my griefs are mine. You may my glories and my state depose, but not my griefs. I'm still am I king of those.
Part of your cares you give me with your crown.
Your cares set up do not pluck my cares down. My care is loss of care, by old care done. Your care is gain of care, by new care won. The cares I give I have, though given away. They tend the crown, yet still with me they stay.
Are you contented to resign the crown?
I know. No, for I must nothing be. Therefore no, for I resign to thee. Now mark me how I will undo myself. I give this heavy weight from off my head, and this unwieldy scepter from my hand. The pride of kingly sway from out my heart. With mine own tears I wash away my balm. With mine own hands I give away my crown. With mine own tongue deny my sacred state. With mine own breath release all duties, oaths. All pomp and majesty I do forswear. My manners, rents, revenues I forgo. My acts, decrees, and statutes I deny. Statutes I deny. God pardon all oaths that are broken to me. God keep all vows unbroke are made to thee. Make me that nothing have with nothing grieved. And thou with all pleased that hast all achieved. Long mayst thou live in Richard's seat to sit, and soon lie Richard in an earthly pit. God save King Henry, unkinged Richard says. Send him many years of sunshine days. What more remains?
Good. I just want to dial back one quick scansion note for both of you. It scans revenues. My manners rents revenues I forgo. And the only reason I bring it up is because it is, I think, like the meter and the verse and
Revenue.
rhythm of it, I think, are really important. Specifically in this speech, we switch inexplicably to rhyming couplets, which is a rhyme scheme in which Shakespeare almost never writes for a sustained period. Miranda, correct me if that's totally.
That is correct.
Cool.
It's really high poetry. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really perfect. Well, and it almost feels French. Like it almost feels like Rostand or Moliere for a moment.
Yeah, Moliere, absolutely.
Mhm.
But I think it can be a deliberate choice. I think there's a couple of ways. I think it's operating on a few levels. I think on the one hand, these two, I think sort of Jamal talking about that sort of like the spotlight zooming in on, like, are we dealing with intimate or
The collective
Presentation.
thank you.
Yeah.
Presentation. Mhm.
That it is on the one hand, these two, it's almost like to me it's always sort of read like Romeo and Juliet slipping into that sonnet together when they're in the party scene. Like these two on a certain level are in. Richard is definitely leading, but Bolingbroke completes a few of these rhymes. So it's not like Bolingbroke isn't paying attention. It's not like Bolingbroke is engaging. But I also it's that thing of like, it sticks in your memory more, right? It's like this, if you watch Richard II, this is always not just the sort of the great image of the inverted crown, which we're not going to worry about this today, but we're going to attempt some sort of staging of that just so you guys have something to play with, and because it is such an iconic image. But it is also like, it sticks in the minds of the audience, and therefore it must stick in the minds of the characters in the play. I mean, this is sort of Richard's last it's his last opportunity to have any panache, right? And it's his last opportunity to sort of to fully be king, and talking about taking agency too, right? I love this. I know no I, for I must nothing be. He's admitting the fact that he has no sense of identity. Therefore, no, for I resign to thee, right? It's not that the crown's being taken away from me. I'm going to make sure that everyone sees me put this back on my head. I'm going to make sure that everyone sees me hand it to you. And then I'm going to end it with a couplet about the fact that I'm going to be dead soon, right? And so I'm going to give you, I'm not going to mandate this. I'm going to give you guys the option of corrupting the pronunciation of says to says. You don't have to take it, but know that it's on the table as an option. Again, Shakespeare, if you've never checked out the work of David and Ben Crystal, who've done a ton of really fascinating work on original pronunciation, absolutely do that. It's gorgeous.
And let me just follow on the on what Will just said. The David and Ben Crystal, their father and son, they have videos all over YouTube. They have books, but they talk about just doing Shakespeare in original pronunciation, and what we gain, the rhymes we hear, the word connections, the image connections, the thematic connections that we hear when it's spoken in original pronunciation. And it's not, dry, dusty academic bones. They're really entertaining. Both of them are very entertaining. And it's great stuff. As I say, it's all on YouTube, or I can send you a link.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'll do that.
It's fascinating.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great stuff. Yeah.
Found myself on a Zoom with Ben Crystal over the pandemic.
Oh, I know. I mean, both of them are just amazing. And Will, I just also wanted to say the rhyming couplets here, I think, for me, always sort of add to the it's a ritual. He's ritually divesting himself, as you say. He's uncrowning himself, and the couplets reinforce that idea. I think that it is a ritualistic unkinging of himself.
This is really what Bolingbroke wants to see. This is what this is all about for him, right? He's putting this on display so that the people can see Richard handing him the crown. Is this sort of on purpose by him? Like,
I would say that Miranda, cutting, but I would say that's a question for when we get into the nitty gritty of rehearsal, because I think there is a Bolingbroke that feels more confident and wants everyone to see Richard giving that, and there's also a version of this where Bolingbroke would prefer this whole thing was happening behind closed doors, and that suddenly he was just the king, right? Like it's not. I don't know that. Well, and I don't know. I don't know if Bolingbroke is going into the scene thinking like excited. I mean, it sounds basic, but I don't know if this is something. If getting the crown is something that I don't know what that fills Bolingbroke with. I don't know if it fills him with terror. At a certain point, it does. But at what point does it fill him with terror? At what point does he realize exactly what he has invited upon himself? I don't know. That's my 10 cents, Miranda.
Yeah, and I don't think he knows, and it's certainly interesting that it's Northumberland who keeps saying, sign here, sign here, just admit to all this, and he keeps hammering it home, and finally Richard loses his composure. Well, his composure. Richard loses his composure, and it's Bolingbroke who says, just let it go, and I always find the tension in that moment so interesting. Bolingbroke says, let it go. And I realize we're jumping ahead a bit here, but and Northumberland says, the commons will not else be satisfied. And it's Richard who says, they shall be satisfied. It's not Henry Bolingbroke who says they shall be satisfied. It's Richard, and
yeah, because I'm asking because Richard says, what service am I here to do, basically? And I was wondering, what service is he there to do? What is, why is he in this room?
He's definitely there to hand the crown. Whether or not Bolingbroke wanted him to go on this whole sort of like ritualized thing, I think that's where the nuance centers in, because it's not demure. He calls it like it is, and he whether there's a question mark about the deposing of a king, the murder of a king, there's no gray area there. And that's a decision that will haunt. I was listening to the Simon Russell Beale book, and he's never played Henry IV, but he was invited to a dinner where he and Geoffrey Stretfield read 4.3 from Henry IV Part 2, which is the king's death scene. And the dinner was held in the Jerusalem Chamber of Westminster, which is the room where Henry IV died. And there was a point where Simon Russell Beale is like in the middle of this beautiful speech he has about I think it's after Hal has made it clear that he's going to be taking it seriously. He looks at the crown and he says, how I came by this crown, oh God, forgive and grant it may with thee with in true peace live. And he just sort of spontaneously looked up at the ceiling. And the building was commissioned by Richard II. He also apparently introduced the fork to English culture. But anyways, the building was commissioned by Richard II. And he looks up and the ceiling is just covered with, it's like Richard's coat of arms had been painted 1,000 times on the ceiling, which meant that the last thing that this man saw in his life because he would have been lying in the Jerusalem chamber dying, the last thing he would have seen would have been 1,000 copies of the coat of arms of the king that he had murdered, right? So it's a decision. The deposing, things get out of control for Bolingbroke, definitely, and it leads to, and whether or not Bolingbroke whether or not Bolingbroke directly orders this murder is up to some debate, but the consequences are his, and it plagued him for the rest of his life. I don't remember how we got on that, but
just Bolingbroke's agency, really, how much of this he intends to be a public renunciation of the crown.
I don't know. I mean, for my money, it's a question mark.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, we got 10 minutes left. So let's press on. So no more, but that you read these accusations and these grievous crimes committed by your person and your followers against the state and profit of this land, that by confessing them the souls of men may deem that you are worthily deposed.
Must I do so? And must I ravel out my weaved up follies? Weaved up follies?
We've done.
Weaved up follies? Gentle Northumberland, if thy offences were upon record, would it not shame thee in so fair a troop to read a lecture of them? If thou wouldst, there shouldst thou find one heinous article containing the disposing of a king and cracking the strong warrant of an oath, marked with a blot, damned in the book of heaven. Nay, all of you that stand and look upon me, whilst that my wretchedness doth bait myself, though some of you with palate wash your hands, showing an outward pity, yet you palates have here delivered me to a sour cross, and water cannot wash away your sin.
Great. I'm going to hold this just because it's a nice chunk and I want to unpack it.
Yeah.
Great. Well, and I love that I want to call it, like, I love that both of you, I love that you're taking your time. Like, I think, again, if Richard is speaking, it's one of those things where it's like, as long as Richard has the mic, no one can kill him. Like, he has to keep talking. Good. So I love this. The first image that leaps out to me is, like, I love to read a lecture of them, right? That it's such a mundane image, but again, I think it just speaks to, like, the inventiveness of this man. Unpack this for me. So this first few lines, what are we saying?
Absolutely. Must I do so? And must I ravel out my weaved up follies? Must I expose myself? Must I reveal it all? Mm-hmm. Gentle Northumberland, if thy offenses were upon record, Northumberland, if yours are upon record, would it not shame you? Would you not feel shame if so fair a troop to read a lecture of them? So if it were you, would you want all of your wrongs read like a lecture before this room? Yeah. If thou wouldst, there shouldst thou find one heinous article containing the deposing of a king and cracking the strong warrant of an oath. If we did that, you will find this mark and this blot in that bitch. Sorry, we are on YouTube. I don't know who's watching. I'm sorry. My mouth, man. My mama's my mama. Anyway. Yeah.
This is excellent. And I just want to flag one thing, because I think both of you read this, and I just want to give this note to both of you. I think shouldst is of less importance than find. If what's there shouldst thou find one, and then from there one heinous article. Beautiful. Continue translating. I'm loving this.
And cracking the strong warrant of an oath. So this, look at what you're doing right now, bro. That's the blot. Damned in the book of heaven. Like, damn, this is bad. Nah, that's okay. All of you that stand and look upon me, nah, cool. All you standing here looking upon me, whilst that my wretchedness doth bait myself, though some of you with palate wash your hands. So palate, can you all break down palate for me? I know we were talking about it earlier, but I don't have my mouth wrapped around the meaning of those.
So that's Pilate. Miranda.
Pontius Pilate.
It's Pontius Pilate who washed his hands of the accusing Jesus. He washed his hands, and
literal. Great.
And then as Will was saying, then there's that, yet you pilot, you pilots, this plural, it's as if they have delivered me. It's as if they are the pilots of an airplane, of a ship. So
Richard's turning himself into Jesus.
Boom. Right. That makes so much sense. I just started questioning myself in my head. Thank y'all for the clarity. So that's what it means. Have here delivered me to my sour cross. So you all have brought me to this cross. You all have walked me to my death. You all have walked me up the hill, wiped my sweat, helped me a little bit when I got tired, and now you're going to sit here and watch me hang on the cross. So forgive you, for you know not what you do.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. It's interesting. Richard really does not like Northumberland.
No.
He really doesn't like Northumberland.
It has been the engine of this whole rebellion, which again is fascinating, because by the time that we get to the Henry IVs, Northumberland has totally lost his mojo. But in this play, Northumberland is the major political power in this play. I would argue.
Yeah, and he's basically saying, if you read a list of all the bad things you've done, what you're doing right now would be on it. It would be what you're doing right now would be the main bad thing you've ever done in the book of heaven.
the king.
Mhm.
Just a fun geographical fact. Of course, the Northumberlands were always rebelling, right, against the king. They always were, and their ancestral seat is practically in Scotland, right? It's so far
Way
north,
up
it's
north,
practically
yeah.
in Scotland. So no wonder they were always rebelling.
Well, and I'm a Percy. Hotspur was my 20th great grandfather. The family fortunes have clearly
Wow.
massive.
Seriously, Will, how cool is
Yeah,
that? Oh
that's
my
it. But
God.
the family fortune, like they had this ancestral seat in Scotland, and then at some point, the family turned into a strange nebbish directing Shakespeare out of an apartment in Pasadena. So clearly some poor decisions were made somewhere along the line.
Or the right ones, Will. The right
Other
ones.
way.
Mm.
They would have loved Pasadena. It's much warmer there.
A lot warmer than Northumberland.
Yeah.
Right.
Excellent. Jamal, crystalline, beautiful. Let's press on. So, my lord, dispatch, read o'er these articles.
Mine eyes are full of tears. I cannot see. And yet salt water blinds them not so much, but they can see a sort of traitors here. Nay, if I turn my eyes upon myself, I find myself a traitor with the rest. For I have given here my soul's consent to undeck the pompous body of a king, made glory base and sovereignty a slave, proud majesty a subject, state a peasant.
My lord.
No lord of thine, thou hot insulting man, nor no man's lord. I have no name, no title, no, not that name was given me at the font, but 'tis usurped. Alack the heavy day, that I have worn so many winters out, and know not now what name to call myself. Oh, that I were a mockery king of snow, standing before the son of Bolingbroke, to melt myself away in water drops. Good king, great king, and yet not greatly good, and if my word be sterling yet in England, let it command a mirror hither straight, that it may show me what a face I have, since it is bankrupt of his majesty.
Go, some of you, and fetch a looking glass.
Good. We've only got 3 minutes left, so I'm going to hold us there, and I just want to point out a couple things that leapt out to me. I think it is significant that you say His Majesty, not My Majesty. And I think I just want to raise the fact that this is where Richard's humor really starts to kick in, and he really starts to deploy it, right? I love, mine eyes are full of tears, I cannot see. It's the glibbest fucking thing he could have said in this moment, right? Sorry. Take that away. So I just want, again, I'm not prescribing anything, but as we get more comfortable with the text, absolutely, if you're playing Richard, you absolutely have free reign to fuck with Bolingbroke.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's dancing between the raindrops, and also something that leapt out at me again, just to sort of dial way back to the conversation about, is it a private conversation or is it a public conversation? I would say that perhaps this is the only time that shift is made explicit. That's Nathan's playing me off. 246. Marked with a blot, damned in the book of heaven. All of you, right? That is an explicit shift from I'm talking to you to my awareness is shifting to the whole room. Okay, it's a pleasure.
Can I have 10 seconds, Nathan? Just a reminder, this is helpful, that line, but they can see a sort of traitors here. It's helpful if we remember that he's using sort there as if it were more, the word meant assortment. I can see a whole bunch of traitors here, a sort of traitors here. Not sort of a type of traitor, but I see there's a whole bunch of you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah, beautiful work, everyone. Such a pleasure.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, no, this was great. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation tonight, and I have a little bit of experience, only seeing the play. I've never worked on it, but yeah, just all the topics you guys are covering, from the humor Richard finds, and there's too many things for me to go into to kind of recap. But I promise you, it's been a very enthralling and educational and informative couple hours on my end. So thank you so much. And I know there's the No Fear Shakespeare and all these modern translations, but Jamal, when are you coming out with your rendition?
Yo,
of
let
the
me
modern
tell you, since
translation?
grad school, there's always Jamal translation. So, give me about another decade. I'm working on some other books right now,
Okay.
but I think it will come out because I think it does serve, I know that I translate in the way from the communities that I come from,
Sure.
and like sometimes we talk about this often, like Shakespeare is so far, and I have a particular way because it's just what I know, it's where I come from. Like, yo, it sounds different, but it is what this is saying, which is why, again, Will, I like that you bring it back close to home. It's like, this is us talking to each other, because that makes it accessible for more people. And so, yeah, it'll come. Keep reminding me.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. Sounds good. Yeah, great work, everybody. Thank you all so much for those watching. Come on back, check out the future weeks, and check out the other sessions we've been doing. Support us on Patreon if that seems right to you. And yeah, excited for us to continue to dive into deeper into Richard II in our next session. So thank you all so much. Have a great evening, and we'll meet again soon.
Great. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Good night.
Bye.
Be good to
Bye-bye.
you.